Hello, and you're listening to Your Majesty's Secret Podcast. I like my podcast shaken, not stirred. Only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. If you'd like to check out more shows, go to foureyedradio.com.
Hey there, Eric here from Socially Awkward Studios, and this Four-Eyed Radio presentation is being proudly brought to you by Raven Designs, illustration and design that fit your personality. For samples and inquiries, visit ravencruise.com.
Bond. James Bond. Shaken, not stirred.
Utter one more syllable and I'll have you killed.
I thought Christmas only comes once a year.
For your eyes only, darling.
I never joke about my web 007.
For England, James?
Come in, Univex. James Bond here.
Am I going to have a problem with you, Bond?
Allow me to introduce myself.
You're that secret agent! That English secret agent from England!
No, you're cleverer than you look.
Still better than looking cleverer than you are.
My God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
007 reporting for duty.
Hello! The name's Berkeley, Ziggy Berkeley, from Cinema on the Rocks. And with me is Eric Dewey from Socially Awkward Studios. And you are listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. That's right, it's a show where we talk about bondage, James Bondage. And not only do we talk about bondage, we also talk about gardening, John Gardening. That's what we're going to be talking about today.
Doing a little bit of gardening. What are we calling this? Gardening for beginners, meaning we're starting at the beginning of John Gardner's reign as the Bond author.
Yeah, out of all of the people who have adapted James Bond novels after the passing of Ian Fleming, Gardner was definitely the most prolific. He got the blessing of the Fleming estate in the early 80s, and he went on for quite a good stretch, up through the mid-90s before he stopped. And his novels have generally come under mixed review. There are some people who are surprised that he's even British because one of the major complaints about them is they read as too American. But we'll be discussing that as we talk about 4 of his first 5 novels, because, of course, for those of you who may remember, we did a previous episode where we discussed his second novel. I admit that's not one of my favorite episodes that we've ever recorded, but hey, we did it.
Yeah, we kind of jumped around a little bit on that one, but, things happen, and we've had time to kind of tidy up our format, I think, so...
Indeed. But before we get into John Gardner, for those of you who haven't checked online lately, they have started to leak out a little bit of information about the new Spectre film coming out this November. There are some photo stills. In fact, there are even some released just on the day that we're recording this of the publicity style. But before that, they did a little bit of location stuff from Austria. And they were showing a little behind the scenes of an action set piece they're about to do. They don't give you too much detail, just enough to be a little bit teasing. So for those of you who haven't seen it yet, you definitely want to go to the official James Bond website and check that out. You can also find it on pretty much every part of the web that you can imagine that plays movies. So like YouTube, whatever, just check out James Bond, Spectre, Austria, and you should be able to find what you need. But so, Eric, what did you think about the stuff that we've seen so far?
I've been very excited, basically. Anytime I see something, I almost don't want to look at it because I don't want the surprise ruined, but at the same time, I love to eat up any information I can. So I end up looking. I don't try to read too much into it because I know a lot of it is still speculation and rumor at this point. So I really just kind of look at the pictures and say, okay. The one picture that was released and we posted on our Facebook page of Bond in the snow scene looked really cool. I mean, it's just a simple picture. It's just, okay, here's Bond. Here's Daniel Craig as Bond holding a gun and a turtleneck, and there's some snow behind him, but it still managed to convey this sense of awesomeness that I can't even really put into words. So I'm really, really excited for this movie, and I'm glad that the small injury that he suffered didn't hinder the filmmaking too much. It seems they were able to get back on track pretty quickly, even though they were saying there might be issues because they already have such a tight schedule for filming. So, but from what
whereas now he can say, "Hey, Harrison Ford, Han Solo, not such a tough guy now, are ya?"
Harrison Ford would be like, 80, so,
No, but I agree with you. I try not to look at spoiler material, but since this was officially released by the studio, I don't consider it spoiler material. I mean, let's face it, it's press release material, and hey, we're feeding the beast because we're the press and we're talking about it. So,
oh, yes.
But that's okay because it gives you a tease. It does what it's supposed to do, but it doesn't tell you a whole hell of a lot. Because along with that still shot, there was a 2-minute video, and basically all you see is that they got a spectacular location, and then they did just a couple of really brief interviews. But the one that I thought was really cool, they had an interview in there with Dave Bautista, who's playing Mr. Hinks, the henchman, and I just like how down to earth this guy is. I mean, he's not letting this go to his head. I mean, he's been on a roll since breaking out from being a WWE wrestler, suddenly starting with a small role in something like Riddick, and then of course jumping big onto the stage for Guardians of the Galaxy. And I really have to say I respect him for the fact that when he found out he landed that role, he immediately took acting lessons. I think it showed. But then along with this role, we now know he's going to be playing Kurgan in the Highlander reboot. But what I thought was very cool is he's looking around this location, and you can tell he is genuinely in awe. And he even said that he's like, this is just fantastic. This is such an amazing place to be in. I'm just trying to soak it all in. I'm an inner city boy. I have never even seen a mountain in real life until I got here. That's just cool. I like that.
Yeah, he seems pretty cool. Like, normally when I see these wrestlers turn actors, it's always a question mark. Are you going to get the John Cena type, or are you going to get the Dwayne Johnson type? People who can actually translate into acting or not is the question. And Bautista seems to have made the transition well. I really enjoyed his performance as Drax in Guardians of the Galaxy, and I'm looking forward to his henchman antics here in Spectre. So I think it's going to be a good show.
I think so too. I'm very much looking forward to it. And then one more bit of James Bond news of the last few days. We're sorry to say that we have another rest in peace, and that would be for Monsieur Louis Jourdan, who played Kamal Khan in Octopussy. He passed away this past week, so our condolences to him and his family. The James Bond fans will remember you always and will be able to, of course, visit you whenever they want to, because you have immortalized yourself on film. Yep. Rest in peace, good sir.
Might have to go back and watch Octopussy again sometime in the very near future.
It's not a bad idea in any case. That's an awesome.
True story. So, absolutely.
So that brings us to the topic at hand, that being, of course, gardening for beginners. And John Gardner, as an author, as we mentioned, is someone who has received mixed reviews from Bond fans. We'll, of course, be giving our own discussions of 4 of his first 5 novels.
You might be getting mixed reviews from these Bond fans right here.
Indeed. And he took over in the early 80s. In fact, he took over right at the same time as the start of the Reagan-Thatcher era. So the start of the hard freezing of the Cold War right after détente. Very conservative time politically, both in the United States and Great Britain. And so that very much shows in Gardner's writing. And another thing and what he's decided to do is he's decided to take Ian Fleming's work as canon, and this is the same 007. He has just basically pretended that 10 years didn't happen. So between the time at the end of The Man with the Golden Gun and the start of his first book, License Renewed, we're in the proper year. We're still in the early 80s. However, we're just assuming the 70s didn't exist, which makes us wonder if James Bond just took a bunch of LSD or something.
We're doing the Encino Man version of Bond. He got encased in ice for 10 years and was woken up, and nobody bothered to tell him that had happened.
Yeah, so that's what we're doing with this. Now, in License Renewed, the way that it starts off is James Bond's role as a British agent has changed. And it has changed because despite the fact that the Cold War just really froze hard after what had seemed to be a happy good time of détente, for some reason the British government, according to John Gardner, has decided to get rid of the 00 section, which to me made no damn sense whatsoever. What about you?
Yeah, I thought that was a weird plot point. Basically he's like, oh, they've gotten rid of it. And then this book is basically about how we're bringing it back. So they could have just skipped that part and been like, hey, it's still here and he's still part of it. Instead, they tried to, he basically kind of said, all right, there is no 007 except for, there's no 00 section except for 007. There's the one guy who everybody still refers to by his 00 name, even though he's not technically part of that anymore. He's just a quote-unquote troubleshooter, pun probably intended, for the British government. So basically, he's doing the same thing he's always been doing. He just doesn't have the official title, which is just too convoluted for words, especially since by the end of the story, they've gone ahead and essentially reinstated him.
Yeah, even though in Gardner's work, at least through what we're discussing today, they never actually do go about reinstating any of the section. I mean, it's still British intelligence. There's still a Q branch, which we'll get to. There's still all that stuff, but no 00s, except for 007, who is basically M's personal assassin.
As one does.
Yeah, okay, fine.
It was an interesting choice. And yeah, like you said, they don't officially say, oh, hey, the 00s are back. But they also don't specifically, they don't really mention again that they don't really make a point of saying, oh, by the way, the 00 section is closed down and Bond's the only one. They kind of really only, I felt it was really only brought up like the once, essentially, and then from that point forward, it was just kind of ignored. And the story just went about its way, which is fine, because the story didn't need that point. That point really had not much to do with the stories in general, so it was interesting. I think maybe he started out with that, thinking that it was going to be something more. Maybe he just needed that plot point because he really, really wanted to title it License Renewed, and so he forced it to fit, kind of like the S.H.I.E.L.D. Anagram, which at least they had the common sense to call out themselves on, so maybe that's what it came down to. Maybe it was just like, I really want to call this License Renewed. How can I make that fit? All right, I know. So I don't know. But other than that, how did you feel about this book?
The way that I felt about this book, and I suppose I could call this my default setting for John Gardner. It changes depending on the book, but my default setting for John Gardner is, if you are looking for an easy, kind of fun, brainless read in the thriller espionage genre, John Gardner works. He's fine. He reads like water. He's very easy to take. His style is very, very smooth. I mean, let me rephrase. Smooth isn't quite the right word, because that's making him sound like, Lando Bond suave. And no, that doesn't happen. That just does not happen.
I would say it flows well. It's not choppy. I have read books where it's very choppy. There's very easy points where you can be like, okay, well, this is an obvious break. I'm going to put the book down and maybe I'll pick it up again, maybe I won't. With Gardner, I seem to feel like I can just flow through it. I don't even notice chapter breaks sometimes, because it does flow very, very smoothly, for lack of a better way to put it.
It does, yeah, that's exactly it. They flow very well. It's really good airplane reading. I can say this very definitively. But the thing is, in terms of me thinking that this is Bond, that's a lot harder to do. It does not feel particularly Bondish. I mean, it feels like he's trying to write that style. Mm-hmm. It just, I never, as by default, because we have this game that we've been playing whenever we've been talking about the adapted works involving the Bond universe, of which Bond do you picture in each of these stories. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, even though my brain kind of wants to force Roger Moore on these just because of the era, right, for the most part, I can't really picture one, because the character and most of the characters come across as that hollow. They're just there to forward this flow of plot that is just supposed to carry me along and make me forget about the world around me, which any good entertainment, that's where you start. Forget the world around you and just absorb yourself into the story. Right. That, I think, John Gardner is very good for, and I think License Renewed exemplified that. However, it's not a stick-with-you book. I didn't find any of it especially exciting. I didn't find any of it exceptionally bad either. I found it very convoluted.
Well, yes.
And it's quite forgettable. I'm not saying I've forgotten it yet. I'm just saying that overall, I would classify this as a forgettable beach read or a forgettable airplane read. Mm-hmm. What about you?
I could definitely agree with those statements. I I went into this. I will admit, you did taint me a little bit with your reluctance. No, it's okay. It's okay. What it is basically your reluctance to delve into Gardner in the first place made me think, okay, these are going to be awful. These are going to be terrible books, and we're forcing ourselves to read 4 of them in a block in order to do this episode.
Well, so you may remember we both didn't like the first one we read.
Right. Yeah, and so that was and so I was expecting just blatant awfulness. And I was pleasantly surprised because it was an enjoyable read. I agree. I also kind of started imagining Roger Moore, but it never really stuck. I ended up getting this kind of bland image of a Roger Moore-like person-ish kind of guy playing the part. It never melded into anything coherent or anybody that I could specifically point out an actor. It would just be kind of one of those just everyman type of guy, maybe a Paul Rudd, you know what I'm saying, without the humor. But
I would say I would picture, if I had to put a name on it, Roger Moore's stunt double.
There you go.
And I mean that specifically in that you never see his face, ever. Because that's what I could never picture. I could never picture the face, and I could never hear the voice right. But I could see him from the back, or something like that, or the hair or hairpiece, whichever.
Okay, I could go with that. My biggest issue with Gardner's Bond is the fact that he tried... either you go all in, or you don't go in at all when you're trying to update a character to a modern era. And what I felt Gardner was doing was he was trying to update Bond in some ways. He was making him, he's being conscious of how much, he didn't just not write him smoking as much. He specifically wrote in that Bond was trying to cut back on cigarettes. That's not Bondy necessity to me. If you want Bond to be cutting back on cigarettes, just don't write in scenes of him smoking. End of story. When you actually say he's trying to cut back on cigarettes, that means it's like, okay, now this is a different character than we've seen before. The same thing with the drinking. He was also trying to cut back on his drinking. He was specifically saying, I'm not going to drink before this, whereas in other stories he's always been like, I need a couple to take the edge off before I go do this.
Yeah, let's do champagne and benzos before we talk to Drax.
Exactly. It's a huge difference in my mind, even though it's maybe a small thing. But he's updating the character, trying to make him a little more modern. Like, okay, well, smoking and drinking that much isn't as in vogue as it used to be, so we're going to have him cutting back on those things. That's fine. Why don't you also cut back on the blatant sexism and misogyny? No, we're going to keep that full force throughout the entirety of the book and in all these stories. It was like the one thing he chose to keep from the original character is the worst possible features of the characters. And it wasn't just Bond either. It was quite, I felt it pretty prevalent throughout all of the characters he was writing. It did not seem like like Gardner might be less of a fan of women even than Fleming was, which is hard to imagine.
See, I'm most of the way there with you. I agree. I don't think that Gardner writes women well at all or imagines women as real people very well. However, unlike Fleming, I got the impression that he at least talked to a woman who wasn't his mother every so often. I thought the dialogue flowed just a little better, but I think that was less his awareness of women, just more so of picking up more on modern conversation.
Right.
Because when I'd read Fleming writing a female character, it's hard for me to even hear a female voice. Whereas, at least with this character, I could at least picture a female voice, even though I could still see the woman being actually a marionette, and we won't get into the physical imagery of where the hand goes or anything like that.
Yeah, that was the one thing that really stood out to me, was the fact that it's like, okay, you're trying to modernize this character. That's fine. You want him to fit into the world in which we live in now. If you're writing him in the 80s, have him be a modern 80s guy. But it didn't seem like he went all the way with it. And he cut the wrong things. I'm like, hey, how about maybe you dial back on the misogyny and he can still have his cigarettes when he wants to. I'm okay with that. But for me, like you said, the plot, of course, was convoluted. But not any more so, I thought, than any other Bond work.
Certainly not as much as some of the later books we're going to talk about.
Yes, that is true.
I will say there's one thing that struck me, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is something that really, really struck me out of whack. In the copy that I have, and frighteningly enough, it is the first edition paperback of it,
wow,
which is my original copy. I was not necessarily an age-appropriate audience when I first read this book. But it's just the blurb in the front, the most sensational publishing event of the year. James Bond has a new mission to save the world from nuclear holocaust. And then, James Bond has a new adversary, the laird of a Scottish castle, a satanic master of destruction. Where'd that satanic shit come from?
Yeah. I'm like, wait, what? I'm like trying to remember back in the book. I'm like, I don't remember there being any
It's
Satanism.
like the blurb saw the name that the guy gave himself and made some really horrible assumptions.
Oh, yeah, that's right. He was codename Warlock. Okay, yeah, all right. Which also isn't Satanist, by the way. Wiccan, perhaps, but not Satanist.
Yeah.
Yeah, so whoever that blurb writer was, they may not have actually read the book, which, from what I understand, is actually kind of common.
Yeah.
Hey, will you write a blurb for my book? Sure, what do you want me to say? You know my fee. Yeah, for me, this book was not... Like I said, I was not let down by it because I went into it with the expectation of, oh man, this is going to be horrible. So when I did read it, I was like, okay, you know what? I actually did enjoy this book. Yes, there were problems. I don't feel the Bond character is fleshed out as well as Fleming ever did. But the story itself, it does flow. It's a very easy read. It's a very quick read. And it does entertain. It doesn't thrill. I won't call it a solid thriller because there aren't any moments you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? It's more like just a good, solid entertainment. I would say this book could probably be easily condensed to maybe an episode of television somewhere, you know what I'm saying? As opposed to needing maybe a movie or a miniseries or something like that to portray the story. So that's kind of where it fits into the scheme of entertainment for me anyway.
I agree. And I'm looking at our main villain, and no, this guy's... Yeah, okay, his plan is supposed to be all almost Spectre-like, but of course he's not with Spectre. Not this early.
Nope.
But he's just... This is like an amateur hour boy, really. And he just didn't impress me very much. On the other hand, we also have John Gardner keeping up one of Ian Fleming's fine traditions of Bond literature, and that is Bond is a screw-up. Bond totally screws this up. More than once.
Yeah, several times.
He screws up more often than he does right. It just he happens to do right during the third act. That's right. About it.
He makes some very good guesses, which ultimately save the day. So it's more like you look at it and you think, okay, yeah, he managed to do the trick, especially don't want to spoil it too much, I suppose, but the very end when he essentially figures out how to call off the dog, so to speak. That was a straight-up guess. And, yeah, he made sense how he explained how he came to that conclusion, but it was a straight-up guess. If it had been wrong, that would have been a bad day for everybody involved.
Yeah, and the thing is, it feels more convoluted that way than it does when you see Sean Connery trying to decide whether to cut the red one or the green one. It feels more convoluted, and I think for me it felt even more so because, okay, he made the right guess, but all of the henchmen went along with it. And when you hear the description of what kind of henchmen these people are, these basically faceless henchmen, that are just talked about in abstract, no, at least one of these groups was going to go rogue. None of them did. That made no sense to me whatsoever.
Yeah, the theory that they were so well trained and military precise, except every single one of them also understood this was a suicide mission and had no problems whatsoever with that. Those are two different mindsets altogether. The kind of person who will do a task to its exacting standards and do exactly what you tell them to do, and the type of person who will go blow themselves up is two different people in most cases. And to find enough of the people who would do both of these things, who would be willing to go into a situation where they knew they were going to die, and then just as easily be like, oh hey, they gave the dismiss order, so never mind, never mind, guys. No, you're right. That's absolutely ludicrous. The idea that they had to be on a suicide mission to make it work, it would have been better, I think, if they had written into the story that maybe these guys didn't realize that what they were doing, maybe if they were trained in such a way that they thought they were doing one thing instead of, I don't know, some way to make me believe that they didn't know they were going to their certain deaths, because it requires a different mindset than what we would expect.
Yeah, and I also didn't believe the little subplot involving a age-old Fleming trick of trying to protect the ill-gotten family title. Because, okay, he's going to all this effort to protect this one little secret of his and get somebody out of the way, but he kept all the damn paperwork that incriminates him.
I like that part. Like, wait a minute.
And
so
he goes back for it.
Yeah, the only thing that proves any of this stuff, which at this point doesn't even matter because it doesn't matter what your name is, dude. Everybody knows what you tried to do. So who cares what your name or title may or may not be? And you have to leave all your money and everything behind anyway to run and hide. But you want to go back and get the paperwork that proves that you're not who you say you are, instead of just having had destroyed it in the first place, maybe? I don't know. Yeah, that was... It felt like that may have been added in after the fact to be like, how do we get him to go? We've got to get him to go back. So what do we have him go back for?
Yeah, as opposed to just killing him at the climax, which is what normal books do.
Yeah. I will tell you, though, all of those things aside, there was one more big point that I did not like about this book. And I don't know if this upset you or bugged you as much as it bugged me, but this really bugged me. The introduction of the character Cute.
Yes.
I hated this so much. The idea that, okay, it's fine if, Q's getting older, that's fine. He has to have somebody come in instead of John Cleese. He's got this hot blonde. Okay, I'm on board. But the fact that she's supposed to be this, like, virginal, little, prissy, nobody can touch her. She doesn't accept advances from anyone ever until Bond walks in the door and then panties hit the floor. It's just...
And not only that, but panties hit the floor in her holographic boudoir.
Yes.
What the hell?
Yeah, it was just like, okay, you know what? Yes, we all know that Bond is supposed to be suave and have a thing with the ladies. We get it, but don't build up a specific character to be like, oh, this woman is untouchable, just to have Bond come in and touch her and defile her, and then try to make her into a main character that we're going to see again. And
which we are a lot.
Yeah, she does pop back up, and so does he, so to speak. But it's. Yeah, I hated that particular interaction. Like, that could have been handled so much better. I did not like the way that played out.
No, I didn't either. And I think that solidifies for me exactly where Gardner's position on all women comes from. Because that's really his proto-mold there, right there.
Yeah, it's like, we get that Bond is supposed to be suave and smooth, and yes, he can make most women fall in love with him. But it doesn't have to be every single woman, and you don't have to make a specific point of saying how cold she is to every other human being on the planet, but, oh, she warms right up for Bond. It's like, it just reeks of insincerity, and it just wasn't a fun part to read, and I was just like, really? And
I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, I enjoy reading the sex scenes in the books. I want that part to go along with the action and adventure. I want that part, I don't need it to be, full-on, softcore pornography or anything, but I enjoy it when it's there.
Yes, I hope the audience does not think we're prudes, because, hell no.
No, I enjoy that part of the story as well, and I understand why that part of the story is there, but this particular time, I feel it was done poorly, and I did not enjoy it.
It was done poorly, it was forced, and it even has a bookend which bothered me all the more because of the existence of the quote-unquote cute scenes. And of course, I mean those cute scenes in the holographic boudoir, which I may or may not pick up as a constantly repeating catchphrase from this point on. You never know. It could happen.
You love chickens in your holographic boudoir.
Ooh, that got... Ooh.
Took a turn. It really took a turn quick.
I may need to step aside for a moment. I'll be right back. No,
Ew.
Hot roasted chicken. Anyway. No, a bookend to that, and this is a scene that it really bothered me all the more because of that scene. And that is when Bond is in his Vegas-style lavish bedroom / prison cell in the Laird's castle, and the Laird's mistress comes in and offers herself to him.
Yeah.
Bond does eventually note that he thinks it's a trap, but before that, and with much more prominence than that,
yes,
he says, you look like a drop-dead model gorgeous woman, but now that I'm looking at you close, you got some pretty awful makeup, you're kind of dumpy, old, yeah, you're ugly, you're not good enough for me, and just tosses her aside. And that also spoke a lot to me of what Gardner is thinking in his misogynistic little mind. And it just, ew. That left, if anything, a more horrible taste for me than the cute scenes, but I think it left a more horrible taste because it was riding the tail, so to speak, of the cute scene. What did you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree. That was a tough part as well to read because it was, basically him just going off about how like, oh, this woman is, ugly, unattractive, and whatever, and he's just all grossed out by her at this point. And then he's like, oh, and also this is probably a trap, so no, I'm not going to sleep with you. Where it's like, just what? Really? Like, just say it's a trap and, maybe make one little comment about how maybe, oh, you know what, up close, you can tell that she's wearing a lot of makeup. Okay, I would even accept that. It may not be necessary, but I could accept that if that's part of the character. Like, we want to know that she's older and she's trying to keep up with the younger woman that's in the house, so she wears a lot of makeup to try to hide her age. Okay. But he just goes on about it for a while, and it's completely unnecessary at that point.
And I think also, in fact, that I think this is a pretty good summation for me of how I feel about the book. When it comes to anything that's talking about moving the plot forward, it flows really well. It's an easy read, enjoyable, entertaining airplane book. As soon as Gardner tries to develop a character, I think that's about it. What do you, at least for this book? But that's I think that's going to be my summation here. Is for all of its convolutions and such, the plot flows well enough to be an easy, simple, entertaining airplane read, but character development, forget it, and you're going to run into headache-inducing problems. Have a drink handy while you're reading.
Yeah, never a bad idea. The characters, even the characters that are already developed, it just they don't quite ring true. I think the only one that maybe I could get away with saying was fairly true to character was M, maybe. But
I'd agree
he also
with that.
didn't feature too heavily. He was just kind of he was almost more of a plot point to get from one piece of story to the next, really, anyway. So, which is kind of true to the character to begin with. There's not a lot of M-heavy storylines. So, it is what it is. It's an entertaining read. It's not the best Bond book out there. It's not a great book. It's not one that you absolutely have to read. But if you are a Bond purist and want to experience all of the Bond stories that are available out there, it's one that you'll end up reading, of course, and it's not the worst one that you could read. So
no, it is better than The Spy Who Loved Me.
That is true. That is very true. But then again, I've read backs of cereal boxes that were better than The Spy Who Loved Me, so I don't know if that's a good comparison.
But on that note, let's now, as noted in a previous episode, we talked about John Gardner's second book, and that was the one where he actually introduced Spectre back into the storyline, and where Bond decided.
Services? Am I remembering the title correctly?
I'm sorry?
For Special Services? Am I remembering the title correctly?
Yep, that was it.
Hey, look at that. I remember the title.
And, of course, this is the one where Bond decided he would sleep with Blofeld's daughter, but not Felix Leiter's, because he's that good of a guy.
He's a gentleman.
Even though he was offered the gift of a daughter.
Yes. That was... Oh, man, I remember that now. Okay, yikes. Oh, Bond, you're such a good friend. Rough. You're such a good friend and my age, and, we're pals and everything. So, hey, would you like to... My daughter? What? When did Felix become an idiot?
But Bond said no, probably because Cedar did not come with a holographic boudoir.
Oh, if only, right?
Yeah. Wow. So for those who've forgotten, just the quick summation of that book, which both of us agreed was rather lackluster. Spectre came back on the scene with a new Blofeld who turned out to be Ernst Stavro Blofeld's one-breasted daughter. Yes, they made a huge point about that she has only one breast, and even though she apparently has the Blofeld fortune and all of Spectre's resources at her disposal, she does not want to get cosmetic surgery. And she's going to lure Bond back into a trap to humiliate him first and then kill him after she screws him several times. And yeah.
Well, he's Bond, Even women who hate him love him.
Boned. James Boned. But anyway. So for Special Services Capsule Review, not the best book. But again, if you are a Bond completist and you have to read everything, the fact that it is the reintroduction of Spectre means you have to. I'm sorry. Drink.
Sorry. But that moves us right along to the second book that we're talking about, which is Icebreaker, right?
Indeed. And what did you think of Icebreaker, sir?
Here's the thing. This is when I really thought, I'm like, okay, you know what? License Renewed wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be from Ziggy's reluctance to read these books again. I was scared that I'm like, okay, so it's only going to get worse from here. Icebreaker, I enjoyed. I'm not going to say it was a great book. Again, we're not into great literature territory or anything like this. And yes, it is convoluted as all hell. But any good Bond story should have some amount of convoluted action to it.
There's some convoluted action, and there's icebreaker.
But you know what? It flowed well enough for me that even though it was convoluted, and even though I knew I'm reading it and I'm thinking, this is pretty convoluted, but at the same time I was like, but I can get on board with it. Like I said, I'm not going to defend it as being great literature or even a great Bond book, but it was much more fun for me to read this one. I had few less points in the book where I was just like, oh, no. There were a few, but there were far less in this one than in License Renewed, for me, personally. I'm taking it that we might disagree slightly on this one.
I may surprise you.
Uh-oh. All right. So
I remembered, and it's been a long time since I've read these books. A very long time. But I'd remembered Icebreaker being one of my favorites. And so I jumped into reading this book thinking, okay, I'm in for the treat of the bunch. And as I'm reading through it, I'm just basically, from a critical standpoint, this is a terrible book. This is horrible. This is just god-awful. We want to say convoluted? Gardner can't make up his freaking mind who's on whose side to the point where basically what you could assume is if you find out that somebody is an ally of someone else, they're not. Until they are again. And then they're not again, and then they are again.
That's actually part of... See, at first, I thought that was going to bug me because it was so obvious that, okay, yeah, they're all supposed to be, quote-unquote, working together. I mean, the basic story point here is that there's a CIA operative, a KGB operative, a Mossad operative, and Bond all working together to take down some really, really bad guy, some ex-Nazi who fancies himself the next Hitler or whatever. I'm like, okay, so I'm thinking immediately... Nobody is actually working together. Everybody is working against everybody else and pretending to work with the other team and pretending to work with one or two of the other members in addition to working for themselves. And it was just convoluted enough that by the time all the webs were untangled, and it was exactly as I had predicted it, basically everybody was out for themselves. With a few little twists in there that I didn't see at the very beginning, but I did definitely see well before they were officially revealed. But there were some there was some fun to it that it didn't really keep you guessing, as I'm sure was his intention, because it was very obvious within the very first few chapters of the book that it was going to be one of those books that had so many twists and turns and backstabs and double crosses and triple crosses and whatever else that you started to expect it. But at the same time, it was still fun to read. I don't know how to explain it other than it wasn't good, but it was fun. I would recommend this book over the previous one, over License Renewed. I would
definitely agree with you because, like I said, critically speaking, it's terrible. And the convolutions are so ridiculous. They're just insane. No one in their right mind would go with this. You couldn't film this because it is so ridiculous.
The characters would lose track. The actors themselves would be like, wait a minute, whose side am I on? I've read the script 10 times. I don't even know who I work for.
But what it ended up being like for me is the book was so horrible. It's like Dino De Laurentiis' Flash Gordon. It's awesome fun.
Yeah, this one
it's so terrible. It's fun.
That's kind of how it came off to me. I wouldn't necessarily go for the so bad it's good categorization, but it is bad, but it is fun. I don't know if the badness is what makes it fun, or if that's just an unfortunate coincidence that it also happens to be bad. But I would say that and again, a very quick read. This is very easy to read in one or two sittings, and not extremely long sittings either. All of these books by Gardner are very, very quick reads. You can bust out, they're what, 200 to 300 pages at most, and
in rather large print.
Yeah, and you can easily bust through them. Like I said, in a couple of sittings. I think with Icebreaker, I read it over 2 days, but I was only kind of able to read 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, but I still was able to read it in 2 days without ever having a solid sit down reading time for it.
Eric read it in the John.
Some of it, yes.
The John Gardner.
Some of it while standing at my little booth at Costco. Some of it while working at my other job. And
But did you read it in your holographic boudoir?
If I had one, I would have read it there.
Fair enough. But it's for me. Once I resigned myself to remembering how horrible it was. I let that horribleness flow through me, and it's like a Sith Lord feeding on hate. It just became the more ridiculous it got, the more fun I was having. Because otherwise, I would have kept wanting to throw veggies at this because I wasn't going to be eating them anyway.
Right.
So it's really ridiculous. And, of course, Bond screws up. Even years before this book is written, Gardner has found a way for him to screw up. I'm not even kidding.
How's this?
His girlfriend, Finland.
Oh, yes. Yes, the girl is, I just happened to be in the area. Well, why don't we just stop by? He's got a booty call that just happens to show up every now and then. And he's like, oh, hey, great. Never notices the coincidence, evidently.
Yeah, and of course, it never dawned on him when they first met. When you find out how they first met, it's so convoluted that it's like, you're a professional spy. Come on, my cat would have been suspicious. But no.
To be fair, though, cats are very suspicious creatures in general, so you never know.
Fair enough. And then, of course, we have Bond making the most colossal mistake of all when he, of course, reveals the big secret that everyone's trying to get out of him after going through horrendous tortures.
That was the worst part.
Is really bad, too.
Yeah. Reading that was tough because I was like, damn, that really sucks. Like, that's some serious hardcore stuff right there. That's, I think, the worst thing I've read about Bond going through since Casino Royale. I think Casino Royale was probably worse, but this was very, very close to it, the torture he was enduring. And the fact that, I was like, what do you, just shut up! Shut up! I was literally yelling at the book for Bond to shut up when he was talking. I'm like, even if she hadn't been a spy, which, spoiler alert, whatever, I'm trying not to use names so that I don't give too much away, but even if she wasn't a spy herself, it's like, what makes you think they don't have some sort of recording device? You go into every room you ever go into searching for bugs before you do anything. You wake up in this room that they have put you in, and you don't just automatically assume that there might be a bug? Which there does end up not only being a bug, but a spy in the room also. It's like, oh my gosh, you got a double whammy there. Yeah, I saw that right when he started talking about it. I was like, no, what are you doing? That was bad.
It was. And I will say also that as much as Gardner really, really likes his vehicles to the point where he has a Tom Clancy with guns obsession with describing his vehicles for pages and pages and pages.
Right.
But for all of his thrill for vehicles, he can't write a chase scene to save his life. I mean, his chase scenes suck. They just have no excitement to them whatsoever. I mean, yes, I'm picturing everything that happens, and the action itself is intriguing, but just the writing is kind of a slog to go through, which is kind of sad considering that Bond is having this really intense chase scene where he's having to play chicken with a bunch of snowplows. I had to say it. Had to say it.
But of course. Yes, there was that. That was interesting, to say the least. But yeah, he does go into way too much detail describing the car, and sometimes not enough in describing the chase, because I did find it sometimes hard to, like, wait a minute, how did he get from there to, but because he was doing something else. So I'm like, all right, I get it now. But it was a little disconcerting.
Yeah, it's when Gardner tries to do detail, whether it's a detail of a person or a detail of action, if it's not a detail of an inanimate object, he just doesn't quite hit the mark. His story can flow, but other than that, he's got some problems. And yet, once I'd resigned myself to that, the worse that chase scene got to read, the more fun it got to read. Because again, I started treating it like a Flash Gordon scene. And in the end, I ended up really enjoying the book just because of how bad I decided it was.
Yeah, it was bad, yes, but it was also fun. And so ultimately, I chose to kind of set aside the badness of it and embrace the funness of it. And like you said, a quick read, fun, entertaining. If you try to think about it too hard, yes, you are going to have issues. But just don't do that and you'll be all good.
Indeed. And one more thing that I would like to point out, for all of the ridiculousness that is Icebreaker, for all of the silliness and convolutedness of the plot, it is actually firmly grounded in some outstanding history that a lot of people, at least a lot of people outside of Europe, have never heard, or at least forgotten about. Have you heard of the Winter War?
No, I had not.
Basically, what happened is before the Americans ended up joining into World War II, basically in the 30s, the Soviet Union decided, we used to own that land that's called Finland now, because they broke away by taking advantage of the Bolshevik Revolution, and we'd like that back.
That's ours.
So
we want it.
Yeah. So they invaded Finland. However, Finland had this really, really wonderful military strategist named von Mannerheim, and he basically kept the losses down to a minimum. Even though he was vastly outnumbered, he was able to fend off the Soviets for the most part. They did get some territory, but he at least got them to broker a peace deal. Now, everyone knew that the Russians were going to be coming back, and Mannerheim was trying to think of, okay, now what are we going to do? Because he needed someone to help him stave off the Russians. And while he at first thought about the English and the French, they couldn't get to Finland by any convenient means, and plus they were about to ally with the Soviets. So he had to look toward the only ally that was convenient that might help him, and who was dying to help him, the Nazis. So you see where that starts to convolute now, where the little references to people who were Finnish, who were in the SS, would come from?
Yeah, that makes sense.
The Nazis did, in fact, help the Finns. They helped them not only get their territory back, but then they started advancing into the Soviet Union. However, they, of course, demanded more and more concessions from the Finns, because the Finns very much said that they only wanted to be involved in operations against the Soviets. And one of the original conditions was that they were never to be in the SS. And, of course, the Nazis said, well, we want some Finns in the SS now. And while there were some who were in with the Nazi philosophy wholeheartedly, because you're going to find, unfortunately, some bad apples in every bunch, by and large, the Finns were really the only Nazi allies who get out of the war scot-free. They managed to pull away and not have a whole lot of the Nazi taint on them, and they were able to talk about anyone who did seem to be involved in war crimes as an outlier. So that's just a really interesting bit of history, especially since we're going with a neo-Nazi as our villain here.
Right. Well, that definitely makes sense, and it's kind of interesting that he would use that for such a ridiculous book.
Indeed,
but it was fun.
It's a really good background for something just so damn silly. But that is Icebreaker, and that brings us on to our next book, which was John Gardner's fourth. And I have a feeling that you had the same particular kind of sort of maybe fun with this that I did, and that is Roll of Honor.
Roll of Honor, yes. This was an interesting one. This one kind of, to me, I felt kind of half and half about this one. Pretty much the entire book. There were moments I was like, okay, it's picking up speed. I'm okay with this, and then never mind. There was a lot of stuff I did not like. There was a few things I did like. In general, I have to say this was not one of my favorites. But it wasn't horrible bad. It definitely did have its moments. But overall, I wouldn't call the entire thing awful. How did you feel about it? What was your overall impression?
My overall impression, being completely 100% honest, the book sucked. I did not like it. It was just bad. The plotting was bad. In fact, the whole story made no sense whatsoever to me. I mean, yes, I could. I'm not saying I couldn't follow it. Really don't have to be that smart to follow it.
No, it's pretty much laid out for you. That's not an issue.
It's just stupid. The thing that I like, and it's just a general source of amusement for me whenever I see one of these outdated pieces of entertainment, is John Gardner takes his love of describing cars and moves it on to describing the computers that Bond is supposed to make himself an expert in.
Yes, though, my goodness, she pulled out this is what we call a floppy disk. And this is the top of the line. It has 128 megabytes of storage. Whoa, man. That's insane.
I don't even think they were 386s. Weren't they 286s?
I don't even know if they were anything 86s. I think they still had vacuum tubes. But it was, yeah, the computer scenes were rough, not only because of the such outdated equipment and him speaking of the outdated equipment in such high esteem, which I can move past that because I understand the times. I go back and watch GoldenEye, and I'm still amazed by what was considered top of the line for that era. But what really bugged me was, like you said, that Bond supposedly became an expert in like 5 different programming languages, as well as all the computer stuff, and specifically this high-level coding that this guy is doing in his own personal language that he's developed, all in the span of, what was it, a couple of weeks, supposed to be?
Yeah, 3-4 weeks, and he was being rewarded with some nookie on the side?
Yes. Yeah. I'm like, oh man, okay. Nobody can learn, like, you can't learn. Yes, we get it that Bond's supposed to be smart, although, as evidenced by his constant mess-ups, that doesn't always seem to be the case. But you just can't learn that type of thing that quickly and be proficient at it enough to try and fool somebody. The other thing that, the parts that I did like about it, and here's what made it interesting enough for me to continue without just, barfing all over myself at the computer stuff. The premise behind it, that they were using computers in this specific way, the idea being that they were inventing basically these computer games or simulations that criminals were specifically using to pre-plan out very exotic heists. I would have loved to have heard more details about that. The opening of this book was awesome. I love the opening of this book when they're actually describing the first of these heists and how it went down. Like, that was awesome. And the idea that they were using these computer simulations to basically factor in, okay, what are they going to do? What are the options? How can we combat that? Here's what's going to happen if we do this. Here's what's going to happen if we do this. And whittling it down to, okay, here's what we're going to do because this is what's going to work. And then pulling it off. I'm like, that's actually pretty cool.
And in fact, we've seen that, of course, see that happen now. That's actually how our military trains in some ways. That's how our police forces train. And yes, that's how our criminals and asshole terrorists train.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it has come true.
Yeah, and it's a really cool idea, especially for this era of when this book is being written. And it's kind of at the forefront of that. And so that was really interesting to me. The details of Bond suddenly being able to be in the computer, into that computer stuff, that was kind of iffy. But then again, we expect Bond to be able to pick up anything at a moment's notice and fool his way past experts because he's Bond. He's a spy. That's what spies do. So I'll even give him a slight pass on that. I even liked the part where they basically used something that happened completely outside of this. Bond gets this inheritance, completely separate from anything else. Now, let's forget about the fact that he's supposed to be essentially an orphan at this point. I don't know where he's suddenly getting a relative from that happens to be rich, but whatever. We'll give him that. So he gets this inheritance, and the service decides, hey, you know what? This is perfect. You just came into a bunch of money. You had a ridiculous stipulation on that inheritance, which that part bugged me. The fact that it's like, you only get this if you blow half of it right away. What? Who does that? But okay, wacky old uncle. We'll give it to the wacky old uncle. It's okay. And then, so it's like, okay, well, you've been seen spending money. People know you've got some money. So maybe you'd be kind of in the mood to quit and go freelance. And we can get you to infiltrate a group that you wouldn't be able to infiltrate if you hadn't done that. And it's one of the few times that we actually see them really working with the fact that, okay, everybody knows who James Bond is. He can't go incognito someplace because everybody knows who he is. And instead of pretending that's not the case and trying to send him in under assumed name or something like that, we're going to use that to our advantage and get him in a different way. I actually kind of dug that.
I would have dug it if it made any sense to me at all. See, I agree with you that the premise is great, and that's part of why I think the rest of the book sucks, is because the rest of the book does not live up to that really awesome premise. I agree that the criminals using the software for this, and of course we know the criminals are Spectre, except now minus Blofeld. Now we have a guy with, hey, what do you know, an Arabic name. Gosh, taking over Spectre. But when you have... I didn't like the inheritance thing at all. To me, that was just like, oh, look, plop, sticky fish, plot device. And not even a good one. I thought that it was so obvious, and not in the way that Icebreaker was fun obvious. I thought this was so stinky obvious. And then, okay, even assuming that Bond had gotten this money and somehow become a computer expert, even though we know he's Bond. As the bad guys, we know who he is. And yet we believe he became a computer expert after being a spy for so long because?
Just because.
And we're going to hire him anyway because we think it's funny?
Well, on that note, I'm going to go ahead and say, obviously the bad guys have no intention of keeping him around after the job anyway. So they're basically kind of looking at this, and I don't think of that as a spoiler because you have to assume that any bad guy organization whether it be Spectre or anybody else who knows who Bond is from the beginning, even if they hire him on as a freelancer, they're never going to fully trust him, and they're probably going to try to kill him at the end. And I think you just have to expect that. And so that's the thing that kind of got me past that, because I'm like, well, they're just planning on killing him at the end anyway. And you know this,
but
and he knows that. It's his job to get out of that.
And I'd be okay with that if they didn't know he was James Bond 007. But they did. And I'm more willing to forgive that in a movie, because the movies usually have some way to make it play off. But thanks to the wonderful power of Gardner's prose, I'm not buying it. It just comes off as more ham-handed than if you put William Shatner gloves on. And that's a lot of ham.
What do you mean?
I just couldn't buy it. And then when you have Bond playing the military simulation against the bad guy, one, we find out the bad guy is an idiot because he expects Bond to play exactly as history went.
Evidently, he expects everybody to do that, which, okay, that scene I did not like at all, in any way, shape, or form. I was like, okay, this whole build-up, you know what's going to happen. Bond knows his history, this guy knows his history. He's expecting Bond to play it out exactly as history played it out, but yet that's the stupidest possible way for him to play it out. So why would he do that? That doesn't make any sense at all. So I was not surprised whatsoever when that's not how it went down. I was mildly entertained by the temper fit, just because of the description of it.
Because it was just such a baby-ass temper fit.
Yeah,
so
it was. It really, really was.
It's just
the villain in this story was definitely not the strong point. Especially when you get to near the end, when you find out that, oh my gosh, he's been double-crossed by one of the guys. Well,
oh no.
Duh. What in the world made you think that wasn't going to be the case? I'm like, for real? This surprised you?
And it seems to be one of John Gardner's two trademarks. One, there's going to be lots of double-crossing going on, and Bond won't just have sex with whatever offers itself to him, unless, of course, she has really bad makeup and is old and kind of dumpy looking. But that he will also kind of fall in love with every woman that he has sex with.
That is a Gardner signature that I think he looked at the one story in which Bond really did fall in love and said, oh, that was such a great story, which it was. So now we're going to make all of the stories do that. And it's like, but no, please don't. It's really not necessary. I would prefer it if you didn't. That was also unnecessary. Again, like I said, that's why I give this book at the best a 50% rating. 100% would be a yes, go read this book right now. You have to read this book. I would say Icebreaker gets like a 80 to 85% on that scale. No, it's not great, but go read it anyway. This one, it's right in the middle. It's like, you ask me tomorrow, I might say don't read it. You ask me today, I might say go ahead and read it. It's really a question of don't know which way I'm going to fall that particular day.
For me, what it hinges on is if a potential reader finds it hilarious to read about old computers, read this book. Otherwise, forget it. It sucks. That's basically where I'm sitting on this book. Because another thing that bothers me is it's not just that the villain is a weak villain.
Extremely.
It's that the villain is a weak villain who is made to be the head of Spectre. This is Blofeld's replacement. And you don't do that lightly unless you're John Gardner, apparently.
Yes.
And that's just wrong.
I agree with that. That was definitely unnecessary and kind of disappointing. I won't even say kind of. It was very disappointing. I'll go with that in comparison to what it could have been.
So I'm going to rate this book, if I have to put numbers on it, on your 100 scale, this is somewhere in the 30s. It's an F. So.
There you go.
And of course, it has and because the technology is so old and so bad, it has no holographic boudoir.
No holographic boudoir, which you'd think they'd be able to pull off pretty good with that, with all those computers they were using.
Considering, too, that it had already happened in a previous book, but so that is Roll of Honor, which, of course, I'm not giving any kind of honorable mention. And that brings us to book number 5, or the 4th of this particular episode, and that is Death is Forever. I'm sorry, Nobody Lives Forever.
I was like, wait.
Ahead.
Oh, okay, yes, Nobody Lives Forever.
No, he uses the same naming convention later on, so I apologize for that one. Yeah, Nobody Lives Forever. And what did you think of this one?
Okay, this one I think you're going to be shocked by, because this book, as I was reading it, couldn't help saying one thing to myself over and over and over again, and that was, this book sucks so bad. Oh my God, it sucks. I was like, I struggled. It was a quick read. I read this in 2 sittings, and I still don't know how I managed to do that. It was one of those things like I literally had to force myself to read this book because it was just so bad. I could not for the life of me figure out what in the hell he was thinking when he wrote this book. It was just absolutely terrifying to me to think that this was a thing, that he had done this on purpose. Like, this was for real. This is a book that he wrote on purpose. It was bad. How did you feel about it?
I agree with you. It's a terrible book.
It was so bad.
And even though I had slightly more fun with it than you, not by much. It did not achieve that critical mass of Flash Gordon badness that Icebreaker did for me. This is so bad, it's bad. But there are some points where it gets so ridiculous that you hit that threshold of you either have to laugh or cry. And because I wanted to finish the book, I chose to laugh at those moments, but I could just as easily have cried. This is a terrible, terrible book. And again, it's made more terrible by the fact that it has an interesting premise. The premise, I'm not saying the execution or the plot, but the premise is interesting.
It is, but just not enough. Not enough to bring it back from the brink, that's for sure. And it was, this one was just a tough read. And, it's one of those ones that you want it to be better than it is. You really, really desperately want it to be better than it is. And it's so rough. So rough.
That premise that it starts with is that James Bond is going on somewhat of a holiday, except he's got a little bit of business to take care of because his housekeeper May, established character we all knew about her very well, has taken quite ill, and he put her up in a clinic in Switzerland at his own expense to get her well, which was very nice of him, and totally Bond. I can totally see that. I have no problem with this whatsoever so far. So, all well and good. So he's going on this driving trip through Europe, and he's going to go visit May while he's doing it. And, oh, isn't that nice? Moneypenny is such a sweetheart, she's going to go visit May, too. We all know what's going to come out of this, don't we?
No, not at all.
That's not the part of the premise I like. In fact, that's where we start going off the rails. The premise that I like is that the remains of Spectre and the remains of what heads Spectre have decided that enough is enough and Bond needs to die. However, he needs to die theatrically.
Of course.
So we can't just have somebody popping a cap in his head and being done with it. No, they give out contracts to one representative of any particular criminal or otherwise organization that wants a crack at him. That each organization can only nominate one individual or one small team, and they are instructed to capture Bond and take him to the secret Spectre headquarters, where ailing leader of Spectre, who is going to die inside of a month or so, can watch Bond get theatrically beheaded and have his head, Salome St. John the Baptist style, presented to him on a silver platter so he can croak of cancer only after seeing Bond's head on a plate.
The cancer he got from having jumped out of the plane in the previous book. Yes.
Yeah.
He got cancer from jumping out of a plane. No joke. He got cancer from jumping out of a plane. That part did not sit well with me. Every time they would reiterate that, I was like, no, please don't say it again. It doesn't work that way. I just wanted to cry.
The part about wanting James Bond's head on a platter and having it to bring it to him, that part is the premise I like.
I did like the premise of, okay, we're going to just put a blanket, instead of hiring a hitman, we're going to put a blanket out there, be like, hey, all hitmen do it. Because, hey, we've seen that done very well in other movies, Star Wars, and it's worked out very well for, the good guys. But it's a fun premise, the idea that they're just like, okay, we're going to make it a competition. But then there was all sorts of rules to the competition, and then they had a ringer in the competition, and I was like, this is stupid. Just, oh my gosh, just let it play out. Like, you added so much to it that did not need to be added, and it made it bad. It made it very, very bad. And
the ringer is very obvious from the moment the ringer shows up, even before the entire premise is defined.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It's so obvious.
It's like, why is she still with you? And then the idea that she got to stick around with him because he saved her from some bad guys who were supposedly unrelated. And that was the funny part at the end. Those people weren't even part of it. No. It would have been better if they had been part of it. Trying to make them not a part of it made it worse. Anyways, another tangent.
Then the obvious analog to Tracy. Slap in that damn face, man.
Yeah, it was so just bad. Oh my gosh. And then, I mean, the whole reason that these girls are hanging around with them, and we all know, all of us, everybody reading this book knows instantly, these women are trouble. Get rid of them. No, he's going to carry them around with him because he needs a hostage. All of a sudden, he's a kidnapper. What?
And they're going along with it like strawberry shortcake and an adventure on a cartoon. What?
Yeah, he's like, I'm kidnapping you. I'm holding you hostage. And
what a fun adventure. Yay!
The idea to make her... Okay, all of a sudden, Bond has so much respect for women that he didn't check her inner thigh for a gun, so she was able to, surprise him with, I've got this gun because you were too much of a gentleman to touch my inner thigh. Ha ha ha. Bullshit! This is Bond we're talking about. He would have not only touched your inner thigh, he would have checked to make sure you didn't have anything hidden up there, if you know what I mean. That is not Bond.
I don't think fisting is out of the question.
It's all, you can hide some interesting things up there. Trust me, I know. There's some things I've done in that holographic boudoir.
Let's go a couple inches back just to be sure.
Yeah, that whole scene, I was like, okay, she's got a gun all of a sudden. Didn't he just frisk her? And then the explanation of, you were too much of a gentleman to check my inner thigh. What? No, everything about this book just rung so
Your inner
cheap.
thigh was one of the first things he checked.
Yeah.
Come on.
She could have been holding the gun in her hand, and I would have more believed that it was that type of situation where, I checked her body. I didn't think to look and see if she was actually holding it in her hand at the time.
Yeah, I checked out her boobs. I checked out her bikini area. I checked out her butt. But, hey, I missed her hand.
How did you... Oh, she was holding it. Oh, the classic ploy. Man, yeah. No, everything about this storyline, everything he uses to push the story forward is just bad. It's just... it does not read well.
And every convolution and... Come on, threatening Moneypenny and May in the fashion that was low blow, unnecessary bullshit.
Yeah.
Don't like it.
Yeah, it was, and for some reason we were supposed to believe all along that he was going to be this bad guy who's done all these other things was going to be honorable and let them go after Bond was dead. What? Why would you believe that? Why would you even for a second believe that might be a remote possibility?
And Gardner thinks he's so clever, and what makes it even worse is the fact that he decides to point this out in direct prose, just in case you didn't get the message that James Bond is going through all of this and disobeying M's orders to come back where he'd be safe and everything, specifically so he can save the two women in his life whom he would never, in 1,000 years, have sex with.
Yeah, and he not only says it out loud in Bond's inner monologue, not just once, but at least twice that I recall him specifically saying, I am giving up my life, like acknowledging the fact that he was going into a certain death, not like I'm risking my life, but I am going to my death for these women right now. And
not just for these women, but for these women I will never have sex with.
Yes, you're pointing that out again, just in case we thought, hey, wait a minute, did he ever sleep with them? Maybe he did. Oh, nope. He just said he didn't. Okay,
but at least he's
glad to clear that
to
up.
Eric, because of course can't sleep with Moneypenny. Not that I'm saying I disagree.
No, that was. I mean, that's the only good point. But yeah, no, nothing about this book other than the one premise of Spectre hiring every hitman in the world at the same time to go to be in a. I'm even on board with the competition part, as much as just saying, okay, here's a blanket bounty on this person. Anybody who wants it, this is what you have to do. Okay, I'm on board. But then he made it bad. He twisted it and added stuff that just didn't need to be added. It would have been a better story with just Bond trying to outmaneuver, every hitman in the world trying to get him at once. That would have made an interesting story. Leave the girls out of it, or have them be hitmen that he deals with once and then moves on. I don't care. But no, the rest of this story was redonkulous. It was just stupid. It was a hard read.
I won't go so far as to say it was a hard read because, again, Gardner's one gift for flow.
Well, I say that, but then again, I did finish it in two sittings.
It just goes right out there and into the toilet.
Yeah. One good thing about this book is it's worth the fiber it's printed on. You know what I'm saying? It just goes in and comes right back out. No, I wouldn't say a hard read in as much as like hard to get through. This isn't like Game of Thrones where it's like, oh man, I know this story is good, but can I really read 15 pages describing a single tree to get to the story? That's a hard read, but a good book. This is a bad book that's an easy read because it is simple, but it's a hard read in as much as I don't think I would have finished this book if I wasn't reading it for this show. Honestly, I think I would have gotten maybe 5 or 6 chapters in and said, I'm moving on, which is something I don't do easily.
We suffer for our art, ladies and gentlemen. All for you. All for you.
And it's actually only been very recent,
like we love chickens.
Even with the advent of with ebooks and such, that I've even been willing to do that at all. It used to be if I started a book, I finished it. Because usually it was either a book that I had purchased, maybe on sale, maybe used, but I had purchased it. And so by golly, I was going to finish that damn thing. Or it was a book that I had borrowed from the library, and I'm not going to make another trip to a library after having only read a chapter. So I'm going to finish this book. Now with ebooks being as plentiful as they are and as easy to get, and I talked about on Socially Awkward Studios, another show here on the 4-Eyed Radio Network that I'm a host of. I recently subscribed to Scribd. I don't know if you've heard of this service. It's actually pretty cool. It's kind of like a Netflix for ebooks and audiobooks. It's a monthly subscription that gives you access to just a metric butt ton of ebooks and audiobooks. Then instead of paying for it individually, you just have a subscription, you can get all of them. So it makes it very easy to start something and be like, nah, this isn't working for me. Move on to something else. So had this not been for this show, I probably would have stopped this book and moved on to something else.
As we've discussed on a previous show, I think, hopefully that was not Gravity's Rainbow. Fuck, that's a bad book.
I gotta look and see if that's on Scribd so I can check it out.
Oh, dude, no, don't. Just
no.
save yourself.
Yeah, so that's what I mean by when I say a hard read. It was hard for me to finish it because it was so bad that I wanted to not. It's not a hard read in the sense of actual difficult reading, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Hopefully that long-winded explanation made sense to somebody.
No, I got it. I think I follow you there.
All right.
And I mean, granted, not quite as easy to follow as a John Gardner plot, but let's face it, what is? Because, again, that's the other thing he's got. You will never be confused. The only thing you can possibly ever be confused at in a John Gardner book is who's on whose side at any one given point.
Yes. At this exact moment, whose side is this person on besides their own? And the answer is usually nobody. It's usually they're on their own side and that's it. But
and even sometimes they're not on their own side.
Yes.
Just to fuck with you.
Yes. So yeah, in this particular book, even if you're a purist, or what did you say, completist? I liked that term since it's not technically purist if it's outside of the Fleming and Eon productions, I would say. But even if you're a completist, this is one I would say, at the very least, make it your last one. Make this one the finale, the last thing of Bond you ever read, because you've exhausted everything else that's ever been written on the subject. It's really that bad. It really is.
It is really bad. I'm sorry, go on.
I would go back and reread The Spy Who Loved Me before I reread this.
Wow. See, I'm not willing to go quite that far. I understand where you're coming from.
It's a close call, I'll say that. But ultimately, maybe it's just the purist in me coming out. I'm like, at least I'd go back and read the Fleming crapfest instead of the Gardner crapfest.
All right. Now, with that said, out of all of these books, the only one that I can recommend without reservation, and this is with the understanding, as people have noticed, of course, I'm talking to you, all the people who were on my side when I made Eric watch Zardoz. Because I also have enjoyment in stuff that's really bad, I have no trouble recommending Icebreaker. It is the enjoyable kind of bad. It is the fun kind of convoluted. It is the endearing form of silly. I'm all on board with Icebreaker. The rest, I cannot recommend without some kind of reservation on them. Mm-hmm. I would say if I was going to rank them in order from top to bottom, it would be Icebreaker, License Renewed, and just barely Roll of Honor above Nobody Lives Forever. But I really didn't like either one of them. So
yeah, I would agree with that ranking. Honestly, if I'm going to recommend any of them to anybody, it would be Icebreaker first, because I think Icebreaker is the only one that does at least have full enjoyment value throughout. Even though it does have its issues, it's still the most enjoyable of these four. And then I would say License Renewed would be the next, and then Roll of Honor slightly above, and Nobody Lives Forever. Again, I would not recommend this book unless it was somebody I did not like and I wanted them to suffer. I'm like, you kicked my puppy and then you asked me for a book recommendation. Guess what? It's going to be Nobody Lives Forever.
Dude, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it.
Yeah, you want to make somebody apologize to you for
book.
something. They come back and be like, why? Why did you make me read this book? I'm like, remember when you kicked my dog? They're like, I was 5. You were 5. What? I'm like, yeah, but I remembered. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it to anybody I actually respected.
Wow. So Eric gives complete damnation to Nobody Lives Forever.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's one of those books, like, they're books that you can read through and then at the end go, yeah, it wasn't a great book. Or, halfway through you're like, this really isn't a great book, but, I'll finish it. And then there are books like Nobody Lives Forever where the entire time from the very beginning you're just like, this is bad. And if I wasn't doing this, if I wasn't reading this for a purpose, I would put it down. I mean, it was like being back in school and having an assigned book to read and that you're getting through it and you don't like the book. The book is bad and you don't enjoy it, but you have to get through it because you have to write a report at the end. It's kind of like that. Although at least in school, they tend to use classics that at least will grow on you later, even if you don't really respect it and appreciate it at the time you're reading it.
I still flip and hate The Scarlet Letter. The Scarlet Letter can just go F itself.
Yeah, I didn't like that. Quite honestly, I know I'll probably incur some wrath on this one. I don't like Shakespeare. I've never really liked almost any Shakespeare. I've read some of the plays, didn't like them. Seen slews of movie adaptations. I think maybe Henry V was the only one that I enjoyed, and that was more because it was just a well-done movie, more so than because of the Shakespeare of it. He seems so overrated to me. I was just like, just because he wrote a lot of stuff doesn't automatically make it good, guys. But I know people disagree with me on that. They think he's fantastic, whatever.
I'm going to say try Macbeth. Macbeth is very, very good.
I've seen
I will also
couple
say
adaptations.
that Romeo and Juliet is a pile of shit.
Yes, absolutely. Unreservedly, I hate that stupid story. Macbeth I've seen a couple of different adaptations of. I don't think I've actually read the play, but I have seen a couple of adaptations, and I was underwhelmed. If
you're going to see any visual adaptation of Macbeth, and this is basically for the Zardoz value of it,
The Lion King.
I recommend the Roman Polanski version, which was also produced by Hugh Hefner, which should tell you all you need to know.
Roman Polanski and Hugh Hefner teaming up. That does not sound legal.
It's interesting.
Well, I will probably have to check it out, and we'll see if I end up recommending Nobody Lives Forever for you afterwards. That'll be the ultimate insult. That guy's such a jerk. I'm going to recommend Nobody Lives Forever for that guy.
Wow. No holographic boudoir for you.
None. But yeah, so in total, the Gardner books, while not as bad as I feared based on your original trepidation at even broaching the subject, they did definitely take a turn. I mean, they started off stronger and then kind of, well, the first one was okay. The second one we both agreed was lackluster and even bad in places. Third one was fun. And then fourth and fifth were downhill and even further downhill, off the cliff on that one. So hopefully it'll be a little while before we jump back into gardening, so I can cleanse my palate well before that.
Well, we do have one scheduled. You see, I have shows planned all the way through June, folks. However, I may push it back, push it real good, because, yeah, these are pretty forgettable books. However, we were asked by some of our listeners to tackle these books. So again, we do this for you. If you would like us to talk about the next set of Gardner books sooner than later, you can let us know. You can email me at ziggy@cinemaontherocks.com. You can hit me up on Twitter at cinemaotr.
You can find me on the Twitters at Eric J. Dewey. Don't forget to follow the show on Twitters at Her Majesty's Pod. You can email me directly, eric@foureyedradio.com. And you can also shoot us a message on the actual website if you visit us at hermajestiespod.com. You can comment on any of the episodes or just shoot us an email directly from there. So It's exciting stuff.
Yeah, or you can visit us on Facebook, facebook.com/Her Majesty's Pod.
Yep.
So, yeah, either drop us a line directly or leave a comment on one of the two web pages and let us know how soon do you want us to get back into Gardner. It'll happen eventually.
Yes, we will get there. It is a topic that we were asked to entertain, and we're doing it. I just have to hope that they're better than Nobody Lives Forever. That's as long as they're better than that. As long as, I'd love another icebreaker. Something that fun would be great. I'm not, holding out hope that that's going to be the case, but we'll see.
Think about this as the programming equivalent of Dunk the Clown. And Eric is wearing a big red nose and a shitty wig.
Oh, man. I'm going to get dunked in ice-cold water and then pulled out and then dunked back in ice-cold water. Oh, wait.
That sounds like Icebreaker. Okay, afterwards, don't talk.
Ah, yes. When I'm in the hospital room recovering and obvious spy is obvious next to me, I will keep my mouth shut.
But anything else we have to say about Gardner, or do we leave it for the dunk tank?
Let's just. I think we leave it at that. We've given our recommendations. If people, the one thing I do want to say is that in addition to telling us whether or not you want us to tackle gardening more sooner or wait a while before we get back into another episode, would also be very curious to know how you guys out there who have read these 4 books that we just talked about, how you felt about them in comparison to our feelings on them. Do you think that we didn't give one of them a fair shake, or maybe we built one up too much? Let us know. We like to hear that sort of stuff too. So not just about the next time we talk about gardening, let us know what you think about this time as well.
Yes, we like feedback. Feedback good. So that is going to do it for this episode of Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, Gardening for Beginners. Next time, we're going to take a little bit of a stroll off the bonded path, and we're going to talk about Cold War movies. So hope you'll join us for that one. But for now, I'm Ziggy Berkeley.
And I'm Eric Dewey.
And you have been listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on The Fern.
This has been another great presentation by the 4-Eyed Radio Network. You can find more information at 4eyedradio.com.